Yang is always associated with the sun, with brightness, with movement, light, with the male force. The male kind of energy, with positiveness. Not positive as it's value laden here in the West, as if it's somehow good or better, but simply positive force in contrast to negative force, keeping in mind that they both work together as one single unit of energy, one single flow, one dynamic thing that we're all a part of, one whole, right? Associated with growth. Whereas yin is associated with darkness, with the moon, with the earth, with the feminine energy. With the negative part of the energy system. With static kind of energy as opposed to movement and growth. So one is born from the other. We've seen that. We can also put it a little bit differently. One is inherent in the other, and that's the meaning of the dots. The yang is inherent in the yin, and vice versa. One is inherent in the other. There's this mutual arising. There's a virtue that's taught in Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism, those three systems that we've looked at this semester. And that virtue is humility. One of the points of this whole teaching is humility. Because if you look at it this way, wouldn't it be silly for the yin to try to triumph over the yang? Wouldn't it be silly? Yet it's representative of what we try to do every day. It reminds us to be humble in our attempts at triumph in various contexts, because in many cases it's absolutely futile. Did you have a question? Feel free. Questions, comments? There's also another shade to this, because I think we tend to be very judgmental. And I think it reminds us that there's always a little of something else in the groups that we criticize. In fact, I blogged about this last night. You know, it's funny. It's funny because I hear a lot of this. Oh, those Germans, you know, and we tend to kind of stereotype because of what they did during World War II. I hear it from many of my Chinese friends and students, Japanese, what they did during World War II. But you know, and this is, I've been wanting to sort of bring this up for years. I start thinking about that. Isn't that interesting? Because today's generation probably doesn't even know much about World War II. Let's face it, you know, unless you're a history buff, it's some anecdote in your history book, and you don't know much about it. And we're all doing the same stuff, you know, worrying about the economy, worrying about the environment, worrying about our love lives and the errands we have to run and transferring and our GPAs. We're all the same. And so let's say, oh, I'm mad at the Japanese or something. Well, they're doing the same thing you're doing, and they don't even know about World War II. They didn't do it. Okay, well, they're grandparents then. But who? The grandparents were probably just trying to stay alive and hoping that their village wouldn't be blown up. They didn't know anything about it. It was their government. You know? And that government doesn't even exist anymore. So it makes it seem very stupid and futile to hold on to anger toward a whole group. What does this have to do with yin yang? Well, because within the judgment, as if the judgment could be singular and absolute and whole, you find these other kinds of characteristics. Going back to the Germans, what about the Germans who this is what the movie Valkyrie is about. Now, these were Germans trying to bring down Hitler, they didn't like him either. Many of them didn't. And many of them put their own lives at risk to take in Jews. You know? People forget that. When we condemn others, you know, we say, well, what about me? I'm not perfect either. Who do I hate? Who do I condemn? You know? And it can be very sobering and humbling. You know? I think, well, I don't like this group, but what are my prejudices? You know, so the yin and the yang reminds us that there's always that other kind of energy present within the other. And so when coming up against a judgment of the other, you have to be very careful, because there's some of that in you too, and there's some of the opposite in the thing that you're condemning. You know? What do you think? And so, the points of the Tao are all of that. It's this teaching of humility. It's also the fact of, well, we've already gone through this in the context of Zen, that fact of flux and movement. There's that dynamic aspect of the whole system. And there's WEI, and there it is. WEI. Who knows what WEI means? It means non-action. It means non-action literally, but we're looking at Taoism and we're looking at how it's represented, and one of the most powerful ways that it's represented is through that symbol, the yin-yang, that we just looked at, that teaches us about these different kinds of energies and the flow of that energy. But it also teaches us not only humility, but softness. And so no action doesn't really mean no action. It means soft action. And if I were told that I had to pick one term and teach the basics of Daoism, I would point to WEI, and I would point to this emphasis on finding the gentler means of moving in life. Non-action. Yes?
Do you mean like walking slower?
No, I don't necessarily mean walking slower, because you can be a fast walker and have a very graceful way of walking fast. It's about grace. Houston Smith, the respected author and expert on world religions, called it creative quietude. Creative quietude. It's an interesting phrase, because creative suggests that, sure, sometimes we need to figure out what to do in life. We run up against some difficulty or some problem. And it might not be clearly obvious what to do. Maybe we don't do anything at all. Maybe we find a way to do something that is as non-disruptive as possible. That's where quietude comes in, because you creatively find a solution that is as non-disruptive as possible. Quietude, quiet, soft. Not with heavy footprints. You're not leaving mud all over the place, right? As you move through your life, through your existence. There's a certain wisdom, though, and that's where the creativity comes from. And for Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching, the author of the book that you're looking at now, it meant cultivating that wisdom that comes from looking at nature, nature's patterns, nature's movements.